Welcome everyone to the next episode of the Supply Chainiacs. I'm Glenn Koepke, along with my co-host, Chris Kobus. Welcome everyone. And today's topic is going to be centered around detention. Detention is this lovely thing in logistics where it's centered around waiting time, right? So have you ever gone to your doctor's office and showed up and you wait in the office for an hour, right? And always people say, hey, I would love to get paid for that waiting time. And that's really what detention is inherently there's always some slack and time it takes to unload a truck. And so in the trucking industry, generally speaking, there's a rule of thumb, which is the first 2 hours after a truck arrives, assuming they're on time, is free, quote unquote. But if delays happen after that, there is a detention payment that would occur to that trucking company to compensate for the driver for that waiting time. And those charges vary anywhere from $50 per hour up to $150 per hour. And those accessorials are determined by the shipper and their contracted carriers. And so, Chris, welcome today. It's good to see you again. Would love to get your thoughts on detention overall and why is this really an issue for shippers and for carriers and service providers in the logistics industry?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Good to chat with you again today. I think in terms of the overall challenge from a shipper point of view is you look at a couple different things, right? I think the way shippers have managed that arrival time or pickup time for shipments is based upon the plan they're setting within their TMS system or whatever ERP system they're using to manage that. I think some of the challenges that they're facing are carriers are using different data sources to properly set when they will arrive at a shipper site to make a pickup. To make a delivery. Things happen, as we know, and we've talked about here during our sessions, that variability happens. Drivers run into weather or traffic. They can be early, right? A pickup cannot happen or be canceled. So which a lot of shippers are experiencing is there's congestion at the gate. There's congestion at the site, and drivers and carriers are waiting, right? I think from a carrier perspective, part of the challenge is the ability to collaborate today without a visibility platform with the shippers just limited, right? They're reliant on manual processes. They're reliant on a potential latent data to send and communicate back with a shipper partner. And because of that, a ton of just different exceptions are happening to some of the examples you listed earlier, where folks are arriving too early, folks are waiting, right? Drivers are trying to work with gate managers and distribution points to figure out when they can properly unload their goods. And because of that, it creates added costs for carriers and for shippers. But Glenn, I'd love to hear your side in terms of your viewpoint and perspective on how real-time visibility platforms have helped resolve this issue and reduce some of the spend for both carriers and for shippers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two phrases I live by, and I always say, first is if you don't measure it, you don't really care about it, right? And so how visibility providers and platforms help is just having a baseline of where do you have detention today, right? And for many companies, it's just a cost to doing business, but it's a pretty significant cost if you were to aggregate all of your detention charges across your network, and oftentimes it's controllable. Right? These are bottlenecks that from a Lean Six Sigma or continuous improvement standpoint, we absolutely can impact as shippers. And so, making sure that we measure it first off, so we care about it is really important. Second is, I've mentioned this before, is that bad news doesn't get better with time, right? And, at the heart of detention, the party that's impacted is the driver, right? And the driver, you think about the US demographic, it's one of the #1 jobs in the entire US. And drivers make money off revenue generating miles, right? Their goal is to not rack up detention charges. Their goal is to drive that truck from point A to B and meet the delivery window safely and securely. And so, really it's an offset for those delays that are occurring. But in terms of the impact, it's really that in-moment notice when a delay is occurring as to how real-time visibility solutions help, right? If I know my truck is being delayed, it's right now at an hour and a half, my shot clock, I got 30 minutes left before the charges start to come into play. I can call my warehouse or I can call my end customer and say, okay, here's what's going on. Can you help me expedite this unloading? And so that in-moment decision-making is really important. Second is benchmarking, right? I think when you go talk to the driver community in the trucking business, many of them know who the problematic customers or warehouses are. And that small circle, what will happen is over time, you start to see it reflected in your pricing. If you have a rate per mile and a site is notoriously bad at detention, what will happen is carriers start to build that into their rate per mile because, somewhat of a brass tacks to deliver there. But understanding if these sites are an issue just for myself or the broader industry is really important. And so that benchmarking component is really critical. And then lastly is invoice validation, right? So in the event that a carrier is saying that they've arrived on time, one of the beauty of geofence data is that when you can see a ping inside of a geofence at a location as well as the exit, you can track down to a very precise time when that truck actually arrived, if they arrived on time, and then what that delay was. And therefore, you don't have leakage in your invoicing process to overpay carriers for charges that they didn't warrant. And so those are just a few of the examples that, what I've seen visibility platforms make an impact on detention. Chris, I'd love to see, from your eyes, especially like specific use cases and customer examples, how have you seen it really, take shape at the tactical level?
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, and great points. I think and a lot of what I'll mention, I think in my examples, I think will relate back to the points that you mentioned. One of the customers that comes to my mind, pre-FourKites, pre-making the investment in FourKites, they were paying high 6-digit, low 7-digit annual spend on detention. And how they operationalize visibility, and I'll use the kind of the framework of in the short run, what was the value that they achieved, and in the long run as well. In the short run, the value that they achieved was they had earlier warning to when they were going to have detention type issues, whether it was a driver arriving earlier than anticipated, whether it was congestion at the gate or at the dock door, whatever that was. And they used that visibility, those new data insights that they were obtaining from the FourKites platform to properly adjust their labor within the distribution place, right? Whether that's having folks in the warehouse stop stocking shelves and unlocking a new dock door and properly helping with unloading and getting carriers back on the road. All right, they were using the data to do that, and how they operationalized visibility from there was, to your point, using that data as a new data input into their AR AP process. So their finance team was using this data to properly troubleshoot exceptions from carriers, where when carriers are saying, hey, listen, I'm charging you whatever it is, 5 hours of detention because I sat at the dock door waiting, or I sat at the gate waiting, they're now using our data source to say, hey, you didn't sit for 5 hours, you sat for 2, right? Because I can see exactly when you broke that geofence and when you didn't. So it helps from an efficiency perspective, but it also helps from, again, an AP AR perspective as well. I think in the long term, what I've seen from that same customer is they're using all of this new data from a retrospective point of view to understand where the trends are occurring from a detention point of view, right? Is it all centered to one carrier? Is it all centered to one distribution point, right? To your example earlier, is there maybe a labor shortage at that distribution point where you just have congestion? And they're using that to better adjust their plan, whether it's adjusting their lead times, making labor changes, but ultimately they're seeing a long-term reduction in their annual detention spend. So, well, this has been great, Glenn. Appreciate the conversation as always, and appreciate everyone for joining. We look forward to meeting with you next time here on the Supply Chainiacs. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.